what you've heard a little bit is ransomware, top of mind. It's come up in several presentations. I want to give a little bit of a different view on ransomware, and even the term ransomware. And if you start way back, we're going to go way back. I like history. So throughout history, we've always ransomed things that are valuable. King Richard I of England, on the way back from the Crusades, was shipwrecked in hostile territory near Venice. And he tried to blend in. He knew he was in hostile territory. He needed to go cross country. He tried to blend in. Dressed himself up as a merchant. Unfortunately, he was 6'5", had orange hair, and a large contingent that was spending a lot of money. So it didn't work out so well. He was captured. He was in prison for about 2 years until England paid a ransom of 150,000 marks, which is, in today's money, $3.3 billion, the largest ransom ever paid. If you fast forward a bit, quite a few centuries, to the beginning of the PC era, it didn't take people long to figure out that PCs were also valuable. Data was also valuable on those systems. And Joseph Popp mailed 20,000 floppy disks to hospitals, said it was AIDS research. It was a Trojan. It locked the systems, locked the files. Ransom demand, $189, mailed to a PO box in Panama. Unfortunately for him, this was the era of symmetric key encryption. The key to unlock it all was also in the code. So pretty quickly, a decryptor was released. The little money he did get, he was tracked down, he was convicted and forced to send the money to actual AIDS research. But if you then look forward to more what became modern ransomware, it actually started, and I'll argue there's 3 phases. It started with scareware. And this was annoying, but it didn't actually do that much. That was in the early 2000s. In the 2010s, it turned to ransomware. And this was actually malware that was truly encrypting files and much more malicious, much more impactful. What I'd argue is today, we no longer have ransomware. Ransomware is not the thing that is attacking companies today. It is ransom ops. And this isn't just semantics. It's actually really critical to understand the difference when we think about how to defend and secure and prevent the attacks from doing damage. So going into a bit more detail on these. Scareware. Who remembers this? Am I dating myself? Yeah. So fake AV, there are lots of different schemes to try and scare people into sending money. You have 13 viruses. Send us $50 and we'll clean it up. You get a little download. It did nothing, but they had your $50. There were other variants that popped open the CD-ROM and said, hey, if your CD-ROM is open, you should really pay us money because you have a real problem. They didn't do a whole lot because they weren't encrypting data. They were just a nuisance. But they made tens of millions of dollars. And the people behind these were people like Sanford Wallace. Sanford was, before he got into scareware, he was that pop open the CD-ROM drive guy. Sanford was the spam king. So he sent a bunch of spam, said, hey, this isn't working so well anymore. I'm not monetizing it so well. Let's move on to scareware. And he was tracked down, convicted, not of a crime. This was civil litigation, so there's an FTC judgment against him. And this is really what happened to scareware. These were not sophisticated organizations. They were mainly in the US. They had credit cards that they were taking payments on, so there was this great choke point, cut off the flow of money really easily. They got litigated out of existence. Interesting side note, Sanford did not learn his lesson. He became a club promoter in Vegas. He decided to use some of his innovation, and he hacked into Facebook accounts, sent a bunch of spam to people to promote his club. He was finally criminally convicted and sent to prison in 2016. So from there, from scareware, it wasn't that malicious. It was annoying, it was sleazy, not that malicious, but it planted the seed. What can you do to monetize this valuable system. And so in the 2010s, we saw multiple variants. Reviton was really the first that hit mainstream, then CryptoLocker. And these were no longer just kind of scaring you. They were encrypting your data. You had to do something. And there was no symmetric key that you could find in the code that was gonna unlock this. So those became a real problem. And then, of course, they were all single systems. So they were basically hitting the system, they were infecting it, and then they were encrypting the data that was connected, and that was it. So limited blast radius. And then we have the ones that became common vernacular, WannaCry, NotPetya, a bunch of other variants that followed. The key thing is they were multi-system. They spread themselves fast. They were worms. And so now this blast radius goes from one system to this massive impact. And all of this, and this is the key, ransomware was about the where. It is malware. It is the center of it is the malware. It did everything. It encrypted, it spread, it was all programmed into the malware. It started with the malware. And this is really highlighted while I lifted this from Carbon Black. I hope they don't mind. Is anyone here? But they did a really good job of illustrating what the attack lifecycle on ransomware was. You downloaded it. You downloaded this payload. Maybe it came in on email. Maybe it came somewhere else. It evaded your AV. It locked the system. It locked all the files. And then maybe at the end, it spread itself to the next system. Okay, so all about the malware. And we saw the impact that it did. This was, billions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars worth of top line, bottom line damage to many organizations. It may, in some of these cases, like NotPetya, not actually have been about the ransom, but it was hugely disruptive, and now it was different. It wasn't these unsophisticated groups. These were organized crime. They were nation states. They were outside of the reach of the US legal system or any Western legal system. It's no longer credit cards. There's no choke point. It's Bitcoin. It's cryptocurrency. Now, the good thing was at the end of this massive spread, it kind of stopped. We don't see this type of attack happening anymore. Why? Well, it was actually about the payload, the malware. And so as soon as the innovation on the actual malware stopped, you can see it. You can see its indicators. You can find the file. You can stop it. If you're searching for the malware that's known out there, or the ransomware that's known out there, you can stop it. The reason the innovation stopped, though, was because the organized crime had moved on. And they moved past ransomware into ransom ops. So these are the names, and they're now starting to change and remorph and all, but these are the names that have come relatively commonly into the vernacular today. And before we go on, I do want to full disclosure, I didn't come up with the term ransom ops. I saw it last week in this tweet from Anton Chuvakin, who was Gartner, now Google, super sharp guy, and he was quoting Cybereason, Sam Curry at Cybereason, and we were kind of working through what do we want to say, what is the term we want to use. It's like, this is perfect. It captures the essence of this change perfectly. So Anton, Sam, thank you. So what is ransom ops, and why is it so different? Ransom ops is not about the where. It's not about the malware. In a ransom op attack, you will see entry through all sorts of vectors. It may be phishing and getting a credential that you can use to log into a VPN. It may be a vulnerability in something in the DMZ, a web server. Could be a remote access, some sort of remote access device, something that is facing. It could even be some sort of an implant on an end user system, but it's not the ransomware itself. So it starts, they get a toehold in the network, they begin looking around. There's a human behind this. They're looking, they're doing recon, they're mapping the network, they're figuring out where your data lives. They're figuring out where your credentials are. They're trying to escalate privileges. They're trying to get to domain admin on your domain controller so that they can then take the data and do more. But all of this, there's no ransomware here. There is no malware, unlike in WannaCry, CryptoLocker, NotPetya, whatever it is. There is no malware here that you're going to say is ransomware. This is Cobalt Strike. This is it's all the standard tools, all the standard techniques you see in any modern attack. Then they're going to take your data. They found it. They have access to it. They've got some sort of way to push the data out. They figured out that people had enough resilience and backups that the ransom itself or the encryption itself wouldn't necessarily work. So they took the data too. Now your data's gone. Now, at the very, very end of all of this, they deploy ransomware. This is the actual malware piece. Your data's already gone. You're not going to stop this because they have domain admin on the domain controller, and they're going to blast across your systems, encrypt everything so fast that you don't have a chance to respond. If you see the ransomware, it's too late. You're done. And so it's critical, and this is why that distinction is so critical. You have to stop ransomware before it becomes ransomware, or you're done. So key differences. 1, control. Ransomware, all of that lateral movement, all of the worming, it was programmed in. You knew what it was going to do. You actually had these chains that said, here's exactly what WannaCry will do. It will scan your network for systems that are vulnerable to Eternal Blue. It'll play Eternal Blue. You knew exactly what it was going to do. You knew all of its indicators. And if you stopped those progressions, you're going to stop WannaCry. That won't happen anymore with these ransom up attacks because there's a human who's driving them. They're less predictable. They're smarter. They'll adapt. The techniques will be different. 2, it's not using, or at least as a primary, exploits to move laterally. So if you have an exploit and you know it's playing an exploit, you can patch it. You can patch your way out of this problem. If it's credentials, domain admin on domain controller, live off the land, Windows admin, you're not going to stop it by patching. And the third major factor is, where does the malware play in? With ransomware, it was there at the start, it was there at the middle, it was there at the end. What you want to do is find malware that is ransomware and stop it. With a ransom ops attack, it is only the end game. Again, you see it, it's too late. So let's take the theoretical and make it real. Use a case study from, this is one of our customers, and I'll show you, this is my, not quite the video ad, I didn't know that was going to play, but this is where we'll talk a little bit about what we can do here, but in the context of a real world example. So this is one of our customers, mid-sized manufacturer. There was a phase that they saw in this attack of external recon. They were looking for things that were vulnerable in the DMZ. They were looking for FTP servers. They were looking at email servers. That's been a popular one recently. They were looking for VPN. And eventually, they found that there was a SonicWall VPN. And SonicWall has, like many of the remote access vendors, had some issues recently with ODAs. And so there's an ODA that gave them access into the network. So now they're on the VPN, they have access, and they started doing all sorts of scanning and recon. They were using a variety of tools. They were using NetScan. They were using RDNS to figure out what different systems were. They were scanning for Eternal Blue, so exploits are still a part of the package that they're going to use, even if they're not the primary. They were pushing around Mimikatz and trying to look for credentials. We also saw, interestingly, they were looking up a bunch of things, like trying to understand systems, what are the vulnerabilities. So there were a bunch of these DNS queries all ran through the corporate infrastructure. So there were lookups to various Russian sites, which starts to tell you where the attribution is. 2 minutes in, after they've accessed the VPN, 2 minutes in, we lit up. Vectra lit up with detections for them, because one of the advantages that we have is this is a business for all of these ransomware gangs. When they get in, this is not a nation state that can wait for 3 years and have lots of people to do a very, very stealthy hack. they're effectively, they get in, they have access, they want to find the data and ransom you as fast as they can. And so all of this activity, this to the algorithms, you look in the right places in the right ways, it's very, very obvious, everything that they're doing. If this customer had configured automated response, which is available immediately, this would have been stopped. This would have actually talked to, they happen to have Sentinel-1, but it could be any of the leading EDRs, and it would have been isolated. It would have been stopped at that point. However, they didn't. They had it on key assets to do automated enforcement, and so it did continue. There were more detections. The signal got stronger, and eventually they had enough information available that they felt that they could start figuring out, I think I've got the credentials that they'll let me do what I want to do. Let me query AD. And so they queried the domain controllers to figure out group information, group membership. Do I have a strong enough admin credential here to move? They did. They then used RDP, and they RDP'd onto the domain controller with an administrator credential that they had found. Both of these steps were also detected. The query looked unusual. It was getting large amounts of group information, which is a sign that you're looking for. And the other piece on the RDP, people like to work with keyboards that they're comfortable with. So this flagged a Russian Cyrillic keyboard using the RDP token. Unusual for that token. Also unusual for the environment and the server, the domain controller that they were accessing. So all of this signal is there. From the domain controller, they started to set up to do the final end game here. So they started doing some more very similar recon, a little bit of lateral movement, PS exec type stuff. And they had about 7 minutes of that. And then here is where the automated enforcement on the domain controller happened. They actually took their domain controllers offline. So there was some impact that causes some issues. This happened to be in the middle of the night as well. So it shut the systems down. The alarm bells went off. People were called in. They actually called us in to help with the incident response at that point. But it was stopped. The account was locked that was being used. Actually, multiple accounts were stopped. They were evicted from the network. There was some follow-on probing activity, but at least to date, they have not gotten back in. So interestingly, now you get into attribution. This is, with high probability, a ransomware attack or a ransom ops. It's easy to slip into ransomware. A ransom ops attack from the group that Mandiant has labeled UNC 2447. This is the group that deploys 5-hands ransomware. Now, the interesting thing is we never saw 5-hands ransomware because it was stopped before it actually became ransomware. And that's always going to be the case. If we had seen 5-hands, it would have been over. This company would have already had their data gone. There was no data exfil. This was stop left of exfil. And this case, I showed the specific tactics that were flagged. But the other thing to realize is these are not predictable. Ransomware gangs are now affiliate models. Ransomware as a service. And so even within DarkSide or Conti or Maze or any of the groups, you will see a variety of tactics that are used. This is just a mapping to show the concept of a second attack that we also saw and help to prevent the end game. And so it's color-coded. The things these are Vectra detection models. The things that are in purple were used. Those methods were used in both attacks. The ones that are in orange are from the case study that we looked at. The ones that and we're only in that. The ones that are blue were used in the other attack and only that attack. So just the macro point is you need a breadth of coverage for the techniques. MITRE defend is actually a fantastic way to look at this. Attack has been used quite a bit for a long time, but defend is actually what detection measures do you have in place. So if you haven't looked at that, it's much easier to translate into what are the controls you have than attack is. Okay, so that is a look at ransom ops, what it means, why it's so important. Let me just do a brief history. So let's look back to history. Actually, the early signs of this big gang hunting style of ransomware attack or ransom ops attack started in 2016. And so the signals were there if you saw them that this wave was going to come. It just took a few years to really happen. This is an attack that actually happened in 2014. But I think there's a glimpse of what the future may hold. There's been a lot of discussion already today about how much SaaS adoption, public cloud adoption has happened over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. If you think about all the way back, wherever there's value, that's where people ransom things of value. There is a lot of value in collaboration apps, Office 365, or now Microsoft 365, I guess is the better descriptor. Microsoft 365, Google Suite, or G Suite. There's a ton of data, not just the email, but all sorts of other documents, files of interest. And you think about the public cloud apps, whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure, just a ton of data. And to date, we actually haven't seen anyone go cloud-native techniques to ransom and extort based on that data. They will. It's inevitable that they will. And this is an interesting look at what can happen. A company called CodeSpaces that had a source code management tool that was hosted in AWS. They were a victim of a DDoS attack. And then in the course of that, the attackers gained access to their AWS control panel. They demanded a ransom. The company refused. They started trying to evict them. They figured out that they actually had access to their AWS management panel control plane, and they tried to evict them. And at that point, the attackers basically nuked it all. They wiped out everything using the control panel itself to the point that the company could not recover. There was no recovery. And so they actually had to cease operations at that point. And there were lots of things that they did wrong from a resilience standpoint. But when you think about the data that you have in the cloud, this is coming, and there is, are we ready for that next wave? So, 3 takeaways. 1, and this is by far the most important, ransomware today is a misnomer. It's the wrong terminology. It is ransom ops. And that is critical to how you think about defending your organizations against the worst outcomes that so many companies have faced today with their data stolen and encrypted. Second, good news. It is possible to stop this left of exfil. These are businesses. They are trying to move fast, but they're noisy. If you look in the right places, in the right ways, you will see them with time to stop them before the damage is done. Third, while it hasn't happened yet in any meaningful way, it's going to come for the cloud. Everything of history, ransom follows the value. Value is in the cloud. It's going to come. So think about how to prepare your organization for that eventual reality. That's it. Thank you. If you have, I think we're at time, and I know I'm between lunch, you and lunch. So if you do have any questions, I'll be right outside in the back, or you can reach out to me. It's k2@vectra.ai. Thank you.